Hello, everyone, and welcome to Growing Together, a gardening podcast with me, John Lamb, and Don Kinsler, a lifelong gardener and the North Dakota State University Extension horticulturist for Cass County. Don, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, John. How about you?
I'm doing really well. Just got back from vacation, and here we are. It's the beginning of August.
Can't believe it's August.
I know, and there's just so many things going on in the garden. Everything's going up big, including the weeds. I got to get down.
Yes.
And
hey, can I have a gardening do-over? I'd kind of like to start back in May and request Mother Nature to give us the rainfall a little more uniformly.
Right.
Not all in the spring and then taper off in the middle of summer. But
yeah,
that won't do. But I'm already looking forward to next year. I mean, not that I've given up on this year. There's tons of beauty to be had. But as gardeners, it's interesting. It's all a big cycle.
Yeah.
And not just, you aren't just going in circles. It's kind of like a spiral. Each year you hopefully, it's spring cycles back again, but you hope you make progress.
Yep.
For example, you mentioned the weeds.
Yep.
If I control some of the weeds before they go to seed, then I'll have less weeds next year. So it's kind of a spiral, hopefully upward and not backward in gardening.
Always upward mobility there.
Exactly.
Well, one of the things I think we wanted to talk about with that idea of looking forward to next year and going forward, things that you can start doing now is start thinking about seed collecting. And this is something that I think has really gotten more popular over the years. Certainly, I think in about not even in probably about 6 years, someone will be doing research. The research has already been done and it's already being noted, but the spike in interest in gardening around the pandemic.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the big things about that is both growing from seeds because there was people ran out of plants.
Yeah, there was a big seed shortage because of the demand.
And then so now people are interested in kind of harvesting their seeds and collecting seeds. So let's talk a little bit about that today, about what people know, because this is the time of the year that if you've probably some plants that have already flowered, maybe the seeds, it's already too late. But since we're in this peak kind of gardening time, let's talk a little bit about gathering seeds and storing seeds and how to use them next year.
Yeah, as you mentioned, John, this has become more popular for two reasons. Well, because there was some shortage of seed, and then also because of the cost of seeds. Yeah. They've gotten more expensive. I don't begrudge the seed companies for charging that amount because seeds are worth money. But for my own gardening, I like to save some money where I can because then I can spend it in another place at a garden center, so it's not just I'm trying to get by on the cheap. I'm just trying to save a little here so I can spend a little more on some plants over there.
It's budgeting.
Exactly. So it's interesting. You use the term collecting seeds. Now, oftentimes we'll hear the term saving seeds.
Okay.
Like on Facebook or social media, you'll hear people say, do you guys save seeds? Well, now, there are two meanings to that kind of term, saving seeds. Okay, in some cases, people are thinking, okay, can I save seed? Meaning, can I keep these seeds? I've had leftover seeds. I didn't use the whole pack. Can I save these seeds over to next year? So sometimes people are referring to that. And generally, if you have leftover seeds in a packet, put them in the refrigerator in a sealed jar. And most things will keep for next year. But in most cases, when people talk about saving seed, they're talking about collecting the seeds like you did. So collecting the seeds from this current year's crop of flowers or vegetables, and then using those for next year. And so it's a fascinating thing, and it's not overly hard. Now, if you kind of think about it, historically, I mean, people have been gardening for as long as there have been people.
Right.
They've been needing to grow what they need to eat. And so when you think about it, seed companies are a relatively new introduction, historically. 1,000 years ago, there weren't seed companies. I don't know, maybe a caveman was selling some of his extra seed, maybe. But historically, gardeners, people growing their food that they eat, would have to each year, kind of at the end of summer, they would have to collect and save the seed that they would use. Otherwise, if they didn't do that, they'd be out of luck for the next year. Unless their neighbor had some, they'd be willing to give to you. So saving seed just historically was a necessity. The other thing that's neat about that is in most cases, gardeners historically would save seed from their best.
Okay.
If it was a squash that was really nice and tasty, good size, they would collect the seed, save the seed from that. And when flowers, ornamental flowers, also, if there were some that really looked just great, gardeners would tend to collect the seed from that. So over time, varieties of seed have tended to improve, as people would save the nicest, the biggest, the nicest, the most flavorful. And so things have improved, just kind of people became their own plant breeders in a way. Yeah, just saving the ones that were next. And so it's got a long, long history. And but now, we have seed companies that collect the best and do this breeding. And so that's wonderful.
And they send out that beautiful, beautiful catalog in the in the middle of winter that we can look over when we start getting ideas for summer too. A highlight of winter.
Yes. So, even though it's fun to save some of your own, there are some things that we can't save our own, which we'll get into in a minute. But, browsing that seed catalog and seeing all the different types of things, that with a cup of coffee, that is about as good as life can get. It is wonderful. Okay, so now if we think about saving seed, collecting our own seed for use another year, not everything, you can't do that with everything. So we need to kind of split plants into two categories, those we can save seed from and those that we can't really save seed. Because a big question when we save seed is, will that seed produce the same thing next year? Will it come true is kind of the phrase. Will it come true? And will you get the same thing next year? It would be a shame to save seed, plant it out next year, and then get some sort of little scrawny squash or pumpkin or flowers that don't really have much. And so we do need to be a little cautious as to the type of plants that we do save seed from. So those two broad types of plants, one are hybrids and the other are called open pollinated. And so let's talk about each of those a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay, so first, hybrids. Okay, how do you know if a plant is a hybrid?
Well, let's start with a definition of hybrid. It's like because I think hybrid can be kind of maybe not a loaded term, but people may have already sent up some red flags for some people. Some people think of it as go with a GMO or, genetically modified.
Right, yeah.
What is a hybrid?
Yeah. And of course, GMO is way over there. Hybrids are way over here. They're not related. Okay, a hybrid is when two different plants, two different parents are cross-pollinated. And when plant breeders do this, they are combining the best characteristics of both. For example, I've talked about squash. Okay, if you've got one squash over here that has really nice size fruit, and you've got a squash over here that has really good flavor, plant breeders cross-pollinate the flowers, and then the resulting seed is the best characteristics of both. So they select for good size, good flavor, disease resistance, in many cases, can be combined into a new hybrid. So the resulting seed of those is a hybrid. So the plant breeders hand cross the two. When I was in college, I worked for NDSU for the squash breeder. And so we would each morning, as the flowers were just opening, we would go and by hand pollinate between two different varieties, as we were told. Now, okay, so plant breeders do that. Hybrids can also be in nature. If a bee goes between those two squash types that I mentioned, they'll create a natural hybrid. So there are natural hybrids created just by the bees. So hybrids aren't really a kind of some sort of a lab-created weird sciencey thing. Hybrids can occur in nature. So sometimes hybrids are just found in nature. For example, the delicious apple. Did you know the delicious apple was discovered by someone just growing along a fence row? It was a chance seedling that popped up along a fence row. And the landowner thought, well, these are really good apples. And so that's the delicious apple. Well, that was probably the result of a cross-pollination between a couple of different things, different types of apples. The bird maybe ate it, dropped a seed, and they're the delicious apple. Likely a hybrid between a couple of things. So hybrids do occur in nature. So they're not a dangerous science-y type thing.
Okay.
So they really don't need to be very controversial. And so, does that kind of help clarify what a hybrid is?
Yeah.
And how do you know if a plant is a hybrid? The seed pack will usually indicate either the term hybrid or F1 hybrid, meaning it's kind of the first generation after this cross-pollination. Seed catalogs will usually mention also if it's a hybrid. And so, again, it's to combine the best qualities of two different things. And, it would be hard to imagine life without hybrids. I can't imagine life without wave petunias.
Yeah.
And because, before some of those wonderful hybrid type things, we were limited.
Yeah.
I remember in our days when we had our greenhouse garden center, the selection of petunias was a bit limited. Those that were used for planters and hanging baskets didn't hold up all that well. And so, wave petunias and all the beautiful flowers, many of those are hybrid types. And so, I can't imagine life before.
So can we harvest the seeds from these, new and improved hybrid plants? Is that something that's doable?
No.
Okay.
How's that for a direct answer?
That's good. That's good.
All right. You could certainly collect the seed.
Yeah.
But when you plant those out, chances of them being the same thing that you originally wanted are slim.
Okay.
Because they don't usually come true from seed. They might, but oftentimes what you get is something less desirable. They just don't tend to come true from seed. Now, I tried that with wave petunias. Wave petunia seed is expensive. And I order seed from seed companies each year, and for about 50 seeds, I pay around $20.
Okay.
For only 50 seeds. I make sure I don't lose any when I'm seeding. And so they are expensive. So a number of years ago, I tried collecting from the seed pod on waves, planted them out the next year. Great disappointment. Yeah, they were small flowers. The plant wasn't vigorous. That is another thing about hybrids. They tend to be more vigorous. That's actually a term, hybrid vigor. Those things tend to be more vigorous, which the wave petunias certainly are. And so that next year, they just lacked vigor, and it's like, well, I'm not going to do this again because I wasted my time and a whole growing season on those. So generally, hybrids we don't collect and save seed from. I mean, there'd be nothing wrong with trying it, but generally, it's you get something that's less desirable.
Yeah. So we talked about hybrids there. That's not really doable for collecting seeds. Let's take a quick little break. When we come back, we're going to talk about what the other kind of plant that you should be looking for if you want to collect seeds off of.
When you can't make it to City Hall or school board meetings, local journalists from Inforum.com will be there to report the facts and get your questions answered. Local news works for you. Stay up to date at Inforum.com.
All right, we're back and we're talking seed saving this week. And we talked about that hybrid plants, well, as great and as new and improved and as great, as wonderful as they are, they're not ideal, and they're actually quite difficult to save the seeds and get those to reproduce to be true the following year. So what plants should we be looking for how do we know what kind of plants we should be looking for the seeds that are the best ones to save and to store and replant next year?
Yeah, and although hybrids, there's many wonderful things about hybrids. If some people choose not to plant hybrids, I mean, that's okay too. Mm-hmm. Some people just kind of prefer something. And I should mention too, hybrids were introduced first After about World War II. So hybrids, they've been in nature for all of history. But when plant breeders developed hybrids, it was after World War II. In fact, I think Burpees with one of their tomatoes was kind of the first commercially available hybrid. But many people opt not to choose hybrids. They prefer some of the non-hybrids, and that's okay too. Now, the non-hybrids are called open-pollinated.
Okay.
Open-pollinated. So when you check out seed catalogs, you'll oftentimes see that a variety called open-pollinated. And there are some wonderful heirloom-type seed catalogs, too, that offer the open-pollinated. And the open-pollinated varieties generally will come true, meaning what you collect, the seed that you collect this year and plant next
You can kind of
spring,
replicate that a little bit.
Exactly. Will generally produce what you planted this year. And so you can kind of perpetuate them this year. And that's what gardeners have done over history. Use the open pollinated that will come true, give you what you planted then next year. Also, along with that open pollinated, there's a term that we've really seen a lot, maybe over the last decade, maybe, and that's heirloom varieties.
Okay.
So heirloom varieties are open pollinated. Okay. So heirloom varieties are kind of a subclass of open pollinated.
That's where you really tend to think of and hear about seed saving is with the heirlooms.
Exactly.
That's really because they've been around for, as the name insists, or the name would suggest, that variety has been around for a long time, and it's been kept around because there's some aspects of it that people really like.
Exactly. So now an heirloom variety, that term, okay, what makes a variety an heirloom? Is it 100 years old or whatever? Well, basically the term heirloom, if a variety is an heirloom, it generally was available or produced before about World War II. I mentioned that's kind of the advent of the hybrids. So if a variety was around before kind of the dawn of the hybrids, it's generally considered an heirloom type variety. Well, now, why have heirlooms become popular? There are whole sections of seed catalogs developed to heirloom varieties, such as heirloom tomatoes. Well, there might be flavors that people like that, that hybrids, maybe a hybrid was developed for disease resistance, but in that looking for disease resistance, maybe the flavor was lost a little. So some people on tomatoes, they've got a certain flavor that they like that they're finding in an heirloom.
And especially with tomatoes, you tend to see them grow irregularly. There's not a kind of a standard size that they can grow. They can have more bumps depending on the variety or something like that. They're a little bit more odd.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's some fascinating heirloom types. One of the things with heirlooms, you do have to watch the disease a little more because some of the hybrid tomatoes were bred for disease resistance. So some of the heirloom varieties have less disease resistance. So you need to do some cultural type things to keep them from getting the tomato blight type things, such as, don't get water on the leaves when you water and some of the things like that. So heirlooms are a fascinating thing.
Let's talk about let's get back to some plants for a little bit. And what are some of the plants that we can be looking at that are maybe easy to and accessible to harvesting the seeds from?
Yeah, if we look at flowers, some of the ones that are just really, really easy to save seed from are zinnias, marigolds. I love saving seed from marigold because when the blossom fades and gets kind of brown and crunchy, and you pick off that blossom, right at the base of it, when you open that up, it's all full of the long marigold seed. Have you ever seeded marigolds?
No.
Yeah, they're fun. They're a very long seed, relatively long seed, and so they're fun. The seed is right there, visible, easy to get to. Other ones, bachelor button, cornflower. Those are kind of some good, neat, old-fashioned. Cleome. I grow cleome each year. Easy to collect seed from, nasturtium, cosmos, snapdragons, morning glories. And now if those kind of ring a bell as being somewhat old-fashioned flowers, well, they are. Yeah, because those are some of the ones that are easy to perpetuate from seed, non-hybrids in most cases. And then if we look at vegetables, tomatoes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, tomatoes come true quite well from seed, the open pollinated varieties, because it's fascinating. Tomatoes are not generally bee pollinated. Tomatoes have both the male and female parts in that same little flower, and they're wind pollinated.
Really?
Generally, yep. In most, 99% of the tomatoes are wind pollinated. So the wind, when it whistles through the tomato plant, shakes the tomato flower, and the male and female parts are right there. And so they're just kind of self-pollinated. So you don't have bees flying around between kind of mixing up the pollen.
Mm-hmm.
So that works very, very well. On the other hand, like, for example, squash have separate male and female flowers on the same plant. But for example, if you have two different types of squash in the same garden, bees are going to go all the way in between. Bees are going to be mixing the pollen. So when you save seed, in that case, you might have a natural hybrid, right? You got two different types of squash, and if they're the type that'll cross-pollinate. So if you do want to save seed, for example, from squash, you might need to just plant one type of squash so you don't get a natural hybrid from those. And so, if you like the buttercup type squash, maybe just plant buttercup and don't experiment with another type of squash that could cross-pollinate with that. So I mentioned tomato. Peppers are the same case. They come very nicely true from seed. Beans, peas, squash, pumpkin, lettuce. Lettuce comes quite true from seed. Have you ever had it where lettuce, by middle of summer, it starts sending up that seed stalk, goes to seed, and you kind of let it go. And then the following spring, you'll oftentimes see lettuce pop up in that row. And it comes back very nicely.
So that seed stalk in lettuce, or I see it a lot in rhubarb, that's where the seed head is? And is that where, let's talk about how we should be harvesting some of these seeds, these different plants.
Yeah, because the harvest of these is very, very important. So let's talk about flowers first. If you want to collect and harvest and save your flower seed, the most important rule is to leave those flowers on, the flower seed capsule that's forming. Leave that on as long as possible. So in nature, those seed pods remain on right up until frost, and then they drop and then come back the next year, start growing the next year. So the longer you can leave flower seed pods on, the better. Now, the seed pods vary greatly, according to the type of plant. Some plants some types of flowers are easier to find the seed from than others. Now, I mentioned marigolds are very easy. The blossom withers, and then you have this big seed capsule right below the withered flower petals. You break that open, you see, there's the seed. Zinnias are tougher. Zinnias are more difficult because you have the dried flower and the dried seed pod there. But when you open it, there's a lot more chaff.
Okay.
And it's a little difficult to identify what's the seed here and what are just the chaff. So the way that I like to remember it is if you, in your mind, remember what the seed looked like in the seed pack.
Okay.
Or you can look online. What does zinnia seed look like? And then when you've got this big kind of mess of chaff and you're trying to decide what's the seed here, look online. What does zinnia seed look like? Okay. Petunia seed, fairly easy to seed because after the flower petals wither, you see this green enlarging seed pod. And then when that is brown, then you'll find seed inside. Now, one of the main things to avoid is harvesting that seed pod too early. So in almost all cases, leave the flower that seed pod on, and it's going to look a little different depending on what type of flower it was. Leave that seed pod on as long as possible until it's dry and crisp, but keep an eye on it, check it every so often to make sure they don't start to shatter. For example, cleome I love Cleome. Beautiful, kind of a taller type,
very striking.
sometimes called spider flower.
Yep.
Yeah, it was very striking. When those seed pods get ripe and fully ripe, they pop and drop the seed. So you need to kind of watch when they're nice.
That's how they spread, and that's how they keep. Yeah.
And so when they're nice and dry, keep kind of an eye on them. But if some of them start popping open, then go ahead and harvest the rest.
Okay.
So after you pick them, and there's more danger of picking them too early than too late. I mean, there's no such thing as harvesting them too late. They're going to, as long as they don't shatter, they're going to keep just fine. So when you do pick them, harvest them, put them in a shallow tray. A garage works nice and warm. Make sure they're thoroughly dried out. And then open up the pod, whatever the pod looks like, the seed head, open it up and shell out the seed. In some cases, they're very easy. The marigold, the seeds are all kind of right there in a cluster. Zinnia seed are mixed up in a whole bunch of chaff. So you're going to kind of have to separate out the seed and then let the seed dry really, really thoroughly. Then after, and how long? Well, the longer the better, I don't know, up to a month, I suppose. And then storage is very important, and they need to be stored cool and dry. So packaging them, I like to package them in a little envelope so I can write the name of what it is and the date, and then enclose those in a jar with a lid, and then I suppose you could use a Ziploc bag too, and then put them in the refrigerator. It really works well to include one of those little packages of desiccants inside the jar. Those little packages
that come jackets or things like that.
Yeah, you get those in, or any electronics, usually that you order online, you get electronics, or many things have a little package in there, a little square package of that desiccant material.
So what does that help do?
It keeps the moisture. It wicks the moisture out of the air and into that little packet. And so those work well too. And so cool and dry, and then they should keep really, really well.
How many years will seeds keep? You were talking about like that if you had if you buy your seed envelope of 50 seeds for your wave petunias, maybe you don't want 50 wave petunia plants that year. So maybe you've got 10 or so left over. Will they keep for another year?
Easily. Yeah. Flower seeds will always easily keep from 1 year to the next.
Okay.
So if you've got extra seed, and sometimes, for example, when I save seed, I won't always plant it all. I'll keep some of it, because what if I have a crop failure this year? Then I've got some. And most flower seed will keep for 2 years in the fridge at least. And so next we should talk about harvesting vegetable seed.
Yeah.
Okay, we talked about flowers. Okay, they get a dry seed pod. Okay. Vegetables are a little different, depends on the type. Now, if it's a big fleshy type of vegetable fruit.
We know where the pumpkins are, where the pumpkin seeds
and
are.
Cucumbers, squash, we know where the seeds are.
Right.
And so they should be collected from a good ripe fruit. Okay. For example, when a pumpkin turns nice and orange, fully ripe on there, and when a squash is fully ripe, and again, may as well leave them on there as long as possible. But, in early October, when it's time to harvest the pumpkins, then the seeds will be good too. Cucumbers, if you want to save seed from cucumbers, let that cucumber remain on the vine quite a while. You know how when they get overripe, they're big, kind of yellow, turn yellow and all that, a great big cucumber. So let 1 or 2 cucumbers remain on the vine and get really good and ripe, then you know that the seeds are going to be ripe. So you scrape out those seeds, kind of like cleaning out the inside of a pumpkin.
Yep.
you get a lot of mess with it.
Yep.
And so you can wash away that mess, in water, kind of, the seeds will tend to separate. Also, bad seed will tend to float.
Oh.
And the good seed will sink.
Okay.
Okay, so as you're washing these, the bad seeds will float. Usually it's not many, but the good seeds will sink down. So get as much of that kind of slimy stuff off, and then drain the seed, maybe rinse them, and then spread them on either a newspaper or a paper towel. Newspaper's getting harder to get.
It is hard, but yes,
less and less print editions. Paper towels, spread them on paper towels, let them dry out really, really good. And then when they're fully dry, then they'd be ready to package up in an envelope, put in a closed container. And okay, what if it's a type of vegetable such as peas or beans?
Yeah.
They're not a fleshy with all the kind of mess. They're more of a dry type thing. Okay, so beans and peas, you leave the seed pods on that you want to collect, leave them on as long as possible. So string bean seed, those pods will become dry and brown, same with peas, and leave them on just as long as possible. And they also would start to split open at a certain point, start to drop their seeds. So at that point, go ahead and harvest and save the seed. Let them dry out kind of as you would flower seed. And so that's the way that bean and seeds. Now, vegetable seeds, large seeds, it won't always store quite as long. A rule of thumb with vegetable seeds is the larger the seed, the less length of years that it would remain viable. Okay. So, squash, pumpkin, cucumber, sweet corn, a year or at most 2 years, but preferably use those the following year after they're collected. They don't have the longevity in storage. Small seeds, lettuce seed, radish seed, tomato seed, pepper, they'll store up to a decade in good, cool, dry storage. So there is a difference in the storage length that way as well.
If you're loving this podcast, be sure to check out our full lineup. From news and local politics to sports and true crime, find your next great listen right now at inforum.com/podcasts. That's inforum.com/podcasts.
So all this talk about seed saving, why don't you talk a little bit about, from example, you've been doing this for so long. What seeds do you, I don't want to say have luck with, because you've been doing this for so long, you know what you're doing kind of. What seeds have you found that you prefer to do this with? What plants do you harvest the seeds from and save and plant next year? What do you prefer? What are yours?
Well, Cleome is one of the easiest that I've found to collect the seeds from because the seed pods are right there. Cleome is fairly tall. The seed pods are right there. You can tell when they're ripe because some of the pods are starting to split open already. And so then I look at the dry ones, and sometimes right when you pick those, they'll split open almost in your hand. So you got the seed right there in the palm of your hand. And then also what I like about that is the Cleome seed is often sold as a mix. Okay, so you got some whites, light pinks, dark pinks, and by saving the seed, I can collect from the flowers that I most like.
Okay.
I still want a mixture, but if they're all kind of more white than I would like, well, then I make sure that I save a high percentage of the nice dark rose colored and some light. So I can kind of tailor the mix a little bit to what I want to save. So that I like. And there's another fascinating one that I love to collect. A few years ago, someone sent me seed of a celosia that Thomas Jefferson grew at Monticello. Way back, this was one of his, an heirloom variety, and it's the type of celosia called coxcomb celosia. It has a flat-topped, very unusual-looking flower, flat-topped, beautiful burgundy red, and he used to grow those at Monticello. And it was kind of recorded through the years. Well, anyway, someone visiting Monticello got some seed from that. You could purchase a little packet of seed. They weren't patented, so there was nothing wrong with saving and collecting. Okay, so they purchased a little packet of seed. They grew them out. They're beautiful. And so they sent me some of the seed that they collected. I planted them out. They're beautiful. And so each year I collect some of the seed from those. Easy to collect. You just run your hand underneath one of the ripened flowers, when they're good and dry, rub your, hold one hand underneath, rub the flower, and out falls these little black shiny seeds. And so if they do fall out, they're fully ripe. And so each year I start some of those.
Okay.
And so what an awesome connection, I should say, to Thomas Jefferson. So isn't that neat?
That's great.
So that's 300 years ago probably that he grew those.
Well, and that's I think again part of the appeal. There's the price appeal. There's kind of knowing where your plant is coming from appeal, but also for some it's this connection from generations.
That's a good point, because maybe really it's something like hollyhocks that great grandmother had on her farmstead, and that people have collected and handed down. So great connection also with generations before us.
Yeah, this is really fun. So if people have questions about seed saving, or if they want to send you pictures of flowers or plants or vegetables that they've grown from seeds that they've saved, what's the best way to reach you?
Oh, that'd be fun to hear about some of the heirloom vegetables or flowers that you've gotten from seed. So send me an email, donald.kinzler, KINZLER, at ndsu.edu. And thanks to the listener who sent me a photo of her Tinkerbell lilac that was blooming here in August.
Oh, wow.
It is. It rebloomed, and it was kind of exciting. Tinkerbell is a dwarf form of lilac. So anyway, I always enjoy hearing from listeners.
Yeah, listeners, anything that you want to send Don, questions about anything that doesn't have to be about the topic we've just talked about, but they can be on anything. He's more than happy to take them in, to take a look at them.
People like to share. Facebook is full of gardeners loving to share what they are growing, and I like to hear about it as well.
And it's a great time for that. Well, Don, thanks again for coming in this week.
Yeah, and thanks everyone for listening. Thank you.